My wife thought I was crazy to want to go back to the entertainment style show because she says you've built up an audience and they're not going to follow you. And I was
Right.
like, "What? You don't think they're going to care?" And she's like, "No." She's like, "Make it a completely different show because if I was following you for leadership and you start talking about entertainment stuff, I'm not going to want to listen to it anymore."
Right.
And I know she's right, but I don't like it.
Let's blow this up.
Look alive, Bomb Squad, because the fun never stops. It is season 1, episode 5 of Let's Blow This Up. I'm your host, Jason Sircone, and whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on your favorite podcast app, getting this show through smoke signals, although I don't know how the hell you would have pulled that off. If you did, please let me know because we may have something to work with. I hope you're having a good time. I know I am. As we get episode 5 off and running today, I am joined by the one and only Jay Franze, the host of the Jay Franze Show. I met Jay when he reached out to me to join him on his show a couple of years back. We ended up doing a compilation podcast series of about 12 episodes, helping you become a better podcaster. All those episodes can be found on the Bombtrack Media blog. But today, Jay is going to share his knowledge and expertise on personal branding and how he's used his podcast to make inroads in that regard. Jay's got an incredible show, and he has worked with some phenomenal people in the music and entertainment industry. And we're going to hear all about that on today's show. Also, hang out till the end because Jay and I had a pretty epic debate about how you prepare a steak, the right temperature, that is. Also, chicken wings. So you may have noticed a little bit of a theme here. We're talking business, we're talking food, we're talking nonsense sometimes too. But whether you think the steak should be made medium rare or whether you think it should be blackened like some kind of nutcase, you're going to love what you hear on episode 5 with me and Jay Franze today. So I'm done. My spiel is over. Let's get to today's episode. The reason you're here. It's season 1, episode 5 of Let's Blow This Up with none other than Jay Franze. Let's go. All right. Well, it's been a long time coming. Mr. Jay Franze is on Let's Blow This Up. And it feels real weird, my friend, because I am so used to being on the opposite end of this with the epic series that we put together on the Franzi and Friends show. But it's nice
Absolutely.
to reverse roles, and I get to do a little bit of the question throwing tonight. How you doing, my friend? It's good to reconnect with you.
I am very good. Thank you for having me. I am looking forward to this. But yes, what did we do? A 12 show run or a
I
12
well,
episode run?
yeah, it started with I just made that random appearance on your show, and that led to hey, let's put together a series about how podcasters can learn to be better podcasters.
See what you get for trying to do a good show? You got suckered into 11 more.
It was great. 10 o'clock every Wednesday night for the better part of 3 months.
That's
But
awesome.
dude, I had a blast. It was a lot of fun. That's why I felt like this is a nice way to reciprocate. Even though I'm only giving you one episode, at least for now, we'll talk about what we're doing on podcast theory at another point in time. But welcome to the show, man. It's great to reconnect, like I said, and I want you to take this opportunity to speak to the Bomb Squad and let them know who Jay Franze is and what you do and all the great things you've been doing in the music industry and how you've been changing the world by doing it.
Nice. I changed the world. Tell my wife that, will you? She
I
doesn't even
thought
think
I
I
figured
changed a
she
light bulb.
knew. That should be on the t-shirts and everything.
I know, right? That's how I met my wife, as a matter of fact, if you want to start there.
By changing the world?
By changing the world. No,
Yeah.
we worked together. We worked together in the music industry in Nashville.
Oh, no shit. Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, she's a photographer and graphic artist, and I was doing the productions, the recording and mixing of artists, and she was brought in at the same time to take photos, and then she would do the artwork. So I
Okay.
got to know her, and we were told we weren't allowed to date, and well, about 2, 3 months later, they said, "Screw it, just guys go date," and then here we are.
Figured you were more effective as a couple than a
Yeah,
separate entity.
sure we are.
Yeah, you're
No, it was
proving
good.
that,
I mean, that's
right?
how I met her. Sure,
That's
good
cool.
times.
Now, dive a little deeper into the music business, man. I know you've got many years under your belt, so how's that been for you?
Yeah, 30 plus years now. I started in Boston. I grew up born and raised in Boston, moved to New York, and then eventually ended up in Nashville for the majority of my career. Spent about 20 years in Nashville. Got to work with a few big name producers, which is where I really got lucky. And working for them allowed me the opportunity to work on a lot of the projects that you'd probably hear on the radio and that type of stuff. So I spent 3 years working for a guy named Bob Bullock, great producer, engineer in Nashville. He's actually originally from California. He worked on projects with the Monkees and all these big artists back in the 70s. And then he hooked up with Kenny Rogers, who convinced him to move to Nashville. So he moved to Nashville, and several years later, I met him and worked with him and got to record some great projects for Travis Tritt, Tracy Byrd, and a whole handful of other country artists. And it was a wild ride for a long time, and I still talk to him today. He's one of my better friends, and it's just been a good time. Then I also do independent projects, working for smaller producers or getting to produce projects on my own. And those are actually some of the more fun projects because doing those projects, you get to call the shots on your own. So, when you work for somebody like Bob, you have to do whatever they think is best for the project. When I get to do a project on my own, I get to choose whatever I think is best for the project. So you get to have a little bit more creativity that way.
And from what I've learned, at least from your podcast, and that's what we're going to talk about next, it looks like a lot of those projects that you've got to do, I mean, the people you're getting to connect with, it's awesome. Maybe they're names that we haven't heard of, but it looks like many of them are names we are going to hear. Like, this is you catching them on the initial part of that wave before they hit the big plateau. So that's awesome that you get that experience. And I have to believe that all the experience you've gained over the years has led to you being able to carry on these really cool conversations with all these people.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, you're right. A lot of these people are, up and coming. We just had Presley Tennant on the show. She released today, as a matter of fact. She was on the TV show The Voice, early age, right at 16, right at the very first age you're allowed to be on The Voice. But they were contacting her from the age of 13 to go on there. And so each year they would reach out to her, and she wasn't old enough. So finally at 16, she was old enough. She went on there and got Kelly Clarkson to turn her chair around. And, she's ever since that time, she's performed with Kelly Clarkson out in Vegas. She's performed with Tim McGraw. She's performed with Blake Shelton, and so on and so on. She's been doing amazing. So she's a great up-and-coming artist. But then there's a lot of the people that come on the show because I used to work with them. For example, Jeff King came on the show. He's a guitar player, a session player in Nashville, and he's recorded every artist you can imagine. He's just a hired gun to go in and play guitar. But then he also goes on the road, and he went on the road with Reba McEntire and Brooks and Dunn. So a lot of these people that do come on the show are connected to somebody big in some way.
Tell us more about the podcast itself. How has it evolved over the years? Was it always meant to be in the music industry, or was this something that you have transformed and just built over the years through all of your experience? Tell us how the timeline has progressed for you.
You are correct that there has been a transition over time. When I first started the show, it was called Franze and Friends, like you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. And it was me talking to friends, and it was friends in the industry, people that have worked in the entertainment industry, very similar to the way it is now, but it really didn't have any direction or purpose. It was just me talking to people. And there was a producer out in Las Vegas who wanted to turn it into a TV show. So it was like a local access television show. And so we put it together, and then that quickly evolved into more, instead of entertainment based, it turned into more leadership stuff pretty quickly because the people we were getting were authors who then they were, what we always laughed is everybody was an author, speaker, and a coach. So they'd come on, you get a lot of authors that now turn that into speaking gigs and then coaching gigs. And to me, that felt more like an infomercial than it felt like a conversation. So that kind of evolved over time, and we turned that into just more of a general style conversation and more back into the world of artist development, where we would help people learn how to, whether it be as simple as use a microphone, whether it be what goes on behind the scenes, whether we go in a recording studio and show people how to do something. And I enjoy doing that. So I do that when we have groups of people, when we're doing multiple co-hosts or bringing on an artist that has a specialty. Like you came on the show and we talked specifically about podcasting and how to get from point A to Z in that path. And this show now is what I consider to be my flagship show. It's the Jay Franze show, and that show is 100% entertainment based, where all I do is talk to people about what happens behind the scenes. So the tagline is your backstage pass to the entertainment industry, where we literally just talk to people about what it's like. So, for example, working in the industry for 30 years, nobody ever cared what I did. Even my family, my friends, nobody says, "Oh, yeah, tell me about the equipment you used. Tell me what it was like doing this." No. Their only care was always what was it like working with this person or that person, or what were they like in person. So I was like, okay, well, there's something there. So now I bring those people on and we talk about what it's like working with these people. So what's it like working on the road with Reba McEntire? Or we've had some other people, like the guy from the Oak Ridge Boys came on and he told us what it was like going on tour with them. And then when he came through town, he asked me and my wife to go meet him, and we got to have dinner with them and spend time on the tour bus and have more stories to tell. So it's all about the story. It's been a really good time.
When did you realize that having a podcast was something you wanted to do for your brand? Because this, to me, something I preach and talk about often, the power of branding built within a podcast is hard to compare because you have so much flexibility. You have so many opportunities to connect with people that can forge your brand in a powerful way. They bring those stories to your microphone. You get to have epic conversations with them. When did you realize that podcasting was the medium that you really wanted to lean into?
Well, that's a really good way of putting it, because as somebody, I went to school for leadership development and branding and all of that. And I also went to school for audio engineering to record records. And so there's two things, but I try to tie them together to do artist development, branding people in the industry. And it doesn't have to be an artist. It could be the person who presses the buttons like myself. You still have to have a brand in order to get work and to present yourself to the people who are looking to hire you. So as an engineer, I'm always looking for my next gig. And as an artist, you're always looking for your next gig, or so on. I mean, everybody has a personal brand. But to me, it took a while to figure out how to marry those two things together. And I used to teach audio engineering at the local college in Nashville. And I noticed that the students had no respect for the teachers. And the only way you can get respect from the students at the school was if you worked for somebody, like if you did a project that they might know, or if you had a book. And I found that out was I released a book, and it was like a light switch went off. The second I released that book, all of a sudden the students started giving me respect and started asking me questions. And it was more of a conversation versus a lecture. So I would get up, I would do the lecture, and then in between classes, they'd come up to the desk, or we'd meet in the hallway and we'd talk about everything other than the actual subject matter. And it was great. They were looking for mentorship. And at that point, I think between working on some of the projects I did and having a book, I think those were the two things that really solidified the fact that now they're coming to me for advice.
Do you think that you should write a book has been replaced by you should start a podcast?
I hear them interchange. So yes, I do.
Yeah.
I can tell you I've done both. Your original question, why do I like doing it? I mean, it ties my two worlds together. It ties my love for audio. I mean, you can't see in front of me as I sit here. There's more controls than I know what to do with.
Yeah.
I enjoy doing this
I've
stuff.
seen
I
it.
enjoy the gear. I enjoy all of this stuff. And so to me, being able to do that and do this with you and have these conversations and talk about where the industry's going, or how people have done things and how you build a brand, and to me, this is just fantastic. It's great. I absolutely love it. And I mean, I'm not, even though I've written 4 books now. Imagine that, 4.
Wow.
And yeah, to me, it's like I've never read a book. So I've written 4, but I've never read one. It's something I love doing things. I love like creating product. I don't really enjoy reading. I listen to books, audio. The Audible stuff is fantastic for me.
Sure.
driving in the car, I can consume a book.
Uh-huh.
I have a trouble reading. I struggle. It takes me a long time to read something that other people can do very quickly.
I feel like when we gravitate to this podcast medium, a lot of it is because of that very fact. And I am the same way. I mean, I've embraced podcasting for a decade now. And can I sit down with a good book and read it through? Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes a really good book, like, for example, Alexandra Watkins, who joined me on the season, her book I got through in a weekend. It was a very easy read. Everything that was in that book was something that I was using in my own practices, so it was very
Right.
easy to sit down and just get right through it. But other times, I am a little bit more inclined to take time with a book and really get something from it if I'm reading it. But Audible's the way to go. I love the fact that I can listen to a book much like I would listen to a podcast. And that's just how I'm hardwired. Some people are more wired to read and see things visually. Others, like you and I, Jay, can listen and get much more from it. I think that's why both of us are loving what we're doing on the podcast platform.
Well, that's a good point too. I mean, you've been doing this for quite a while yourself, and I mean, that's how we met, is by doing these things. So, I
Right.
mean, what do you find enjoyable about it?
For me, the fact that I get to have these types of conversations is what it's all about. Now, I've also preached the value and the benefits of doing solo podcasting. Also, something that I find a lot of benefit in, and there's a lot of advantages to it. It all depends on how you want to position yourself. And that's why I have two podcasts now. This being, I mean, the other one being something that you and I will be producing content for in the near future. But I wanted to have an environment like this where things could be unscripted, it could be very free flowing. And I know that new podcasters might not feel comfortable doing that yet. And that's completely understandable because you need to find your voice, you need to develop your skill set. And I've done that over time to now where I know if I do a little bit of research on the front end and get to know my person that's on the other end of the microphone a little bit more, and if it's somebody that I've worked with like you, Jay, I know when we turn the mics on, we're going to have a good conversation because we do it off mic all the time. For me, those connections are what it's all about. And that's something that I preach to everybody when it comes to podcasting. Yeah, you have this dynamic stage to create epic conversations and engaging content, to communicate with your audience, to give them something to truly sink their teeth in and build trust in you. But in the moment, and this is something I think gets overlooked a lot between podcasters, in the moment, it's a one-on-one conversation with a person that you could potentially build a relationship with, and you have no idea where that could go or how far that could go. If you overlook that point and don't take time to get to know the person you're interacting with and you're collaborating with, you're working together to spin some audio gold. But at the end of the day, who knows what that could become? And I'll tell everybody that's listening, before we turned on the mics, Jay and I were talking about podcast movement in August, and we're going to ride to Washington, D.C. together. And this is something that, you know, we'll spend some car time and some windshield time together talking about whatever and whoever. But had we not forged this relationship through the podcast medium and actually looked at it with a deeper meaning, that may not have happened. So I think for me, the relationships that come from this, when you do it the right way, that's where the value is.
Well, it's about networking, right? So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
these type of shows where you do conversational style podcasts, where you're developing that network, where, like you mentioned earlier, the solo one, you're developing yourself more as an expert. But we have these conversations, and I can give you a quick example. I mean, we talk about some of these up-and-coming artists that have come on my show, but we've had some very seasoned people as well. And being able to talk to both of them has been great for me. But what really makes it great is now I'm able to make that introduction to the two. So I've had a very famous songwriter on the show who's written songs for George Strait, George Jones, all these big country artists, as well as he is an artist himself. And I had a young artist come on who's also a songwriter, and I was able to make the introduction to the two of them and say, hey, obviously you're a seasoned songwriter. This is a new artist with being also a new songwriter. Make that introduction. They've been able to work together, and now they have a relationship where they're putting songs together, and it wouldn't have happened if they didn't have that conversation in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So coming on the show and talking to me was allowed me to network with them and also allowed me to make the introduction for them.
Yeah, and to extend upon that point, I think podcast guests that are utilizing that method of building their brands and building trust with audiences, getting out onto other shows, whether it's to grow their brand, grow their podcast, or both, the ones that are taking time to bring value to the show so they can position themselves to ask a question of who else can I talk to? Do you know anybody that might want to bring me on their show too? Because more than likely, if a podcaster has someone on that brings value that they know their audience is going to get something from, of course they're going to do anything they can to help that person get more.
Right.
So sure, I know 3, 4, or 5 other podcasters. It's a pretty tight-knit community, this podcasting world. So of course they're going to make some recommendations. And now that guest is working smarter, not harder,
Right.
because by bringing value and bringing good stories and energy and being a positive force for that podcaster, they now open up opportunities for themselves. That's huge. And again, when you link that back to networking, there's so much that can happen. You never know when someone might need exactly what you have to offer, or just a genuine good relationship can come because you're a good person and you're bringing value to the world. So much power in that.
Well, you know this because you've been on my show, but there's 2 questions I ask at the end of every show. Once the show is, we record live. So once the live broadcast is over and I'm just back to just one-on-one with the guest, I always ask if there's anything I can do for them, because it's about them. They're coming on the show. I want to help them. I want to promote them, whether it be an upcoming performance if they're an artist, whether it be a link in their bio if they're work in development, or whatever I can do to help them. And then the other thing I ask them is there anything I could have done better? So as a host, is there anything I could have done to make your experience better? And that's where a lot of the questions or a lot of the answers come, and I'm able to talk to somebody and improve future experiences. And I don't think it takes much more than just being truly, where you just truly want to help the guest, help the people who are coming on your show.
Now, I agree with that completely. Let me ask you something about the guests that you have on the show.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure some of them are doing their own PR and their own social media, and others have agencies and teams that do it for them. How are they utilizing that content that you produce from their conversations? Are they putting it out there on their own social media? Are they clipping it themselves? What have you experienced in that respect?
I see a lot of people share the stuff that I put out. So I tell everybody, look, I'm going to go ahead and the show gets recorded live and it gets released a week later. So when you come on the show 1 week from today, you'll go ahead and you'll see the stuff will be available to the public. And then what's going to happen is I'm going to go ahead and promote it. I'm going to go ahead and create clips, going to do, audiograms, whatever the case may be, and I'm going to promote it. I will tag you so that way you're aware of what's going out and you can see what's going out. And if you would like to promote it or share it, that's fantastic. But I don't expect them to do so, because they came on the show, yes, and hopefully it's a symbiotic relationship and they come on the show and we can promote each other. Mm-hmm. However, I'm looking to promote them. So I open them up to a new audience. They come on the show, my audience just gets to experience that person and their story. So I create these clips. And then what ends up happening is 9 out of 10 times they'll share the clips or they'll repost the same clip. They might make a comment or two on their own from the clip. Like, this was a great night. I enjoyed talking about X, Y, and Z. And I think that's when things really, really help. I can give you an example of that. I had a guy on the show. His name was Drew Phillips. Now, Drew Phillips, he was in a band called Pay the Girl. They were big in the 90s. They were a rock band. They were on tour with Nickelback and a handful of others. And he also played in a few other bands that are more known, but he was specifically in the band Pay the Girl. And that following that he had came to the show. Like, they watched the show. And then when the show was over, they shared the stuff and they got involved and they listened to the show and they made comments, which was great. This doesn't happen all that often. As you're aware, a lot of times when you record something, it's pretty slow and it takes a while for that to build momentum.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that involvement, that episode got easily double the amount of downloads that any other episode on the show has got. And it got it within the first 7 days, which I know is a metric that we're aware of, but that's one of the key metrics in podcasting is the first 7-day mark, and he doubled everybody else's lifetime downloads in the first 7 days. So yeah, it's amazing when they do share it and they do participate and they do want to get involved, stuff happens, and it happens for everybody. Because yes, a lot of that may have been their audience that already knows who he is.
Mm-hmm.
However, what ends up happening is that video gets pushed out to more and more people, which are more people that don't know who he is.
Right.
And then also the people that listen to the show that don't know who he is. I wouldn't have known about the band Pay the Girl. It was not, even though they performed with some of my favorite bands, I didn't know of them at the time. And I knew of some of the other bands he's played in, but not that one. And it turns out of all the bands he's played in, that's my favorite of them. So, I mean, we all got something out of that.
You bring up a very interesting point, Jay. I mean, the fact that there is so much out there for us to consume. Now, on the podcast front, there's I don't know the exact statistics because I feel like they change all the time, but from the last one that I read, there was something like 5 million podcasts, but only close to a little under 1 million are actively producing
400,000.
content. Yeah, like it's a small fraction. Still, that's a big number when you think of one person. Are they going to consume all that content? No. But when somebody takes the time to bring their story and their value to somebody else's podcast and their tribe gets behind it, and now that podcast, that video, the combination of both starts to spread, it puts seeds in people's minds of this is something that maybe I would like to consume too. And that's how we need to look at growth in that way. I mean, can you get that type of viral growth? Yeah, it can happen, but very often what we experience is one piece of content goes viral and the rest of it slowly moves down the tracks. And it takes time to collectively build that overall catalog that we're putting together. But when our tribes come to push that value forward and get it in front of new people, it can change some perspectives and give somebody something new to listen to. Happens with music, happens with podcasts, happens with television shows. There are things that somebody might think this is the greatest thing in the world, and I've never in any respect heard of it. But if someone that I trust is saying this is amazing, I'm going to give it a listen. I'm going to give it a view. I want to see if they're right. And more than likely, I'm going to find something new that I can add to my own watching and consumption habits. So to me, that's a big part of this. Whenever you're leveraging podcasting, leveraging content creation in any way, whether it's from video, podcasting, or both, the more people you can get to push that out to others, they may not listen today, but they may plant a seed within themselves that says, you know what, this is something I am going to have to check out. And that's how you can grow over time.
Well, have you noticed any patterns between your shows that do well, which episodes do better than others?
No, mine are all terrible. I'm kidding.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know that, but
well,
the one that gets 2 downloads.
you know that you suck. No, it's it's funny because with this podcast, as you and I sit and record, it's not live yet. No episodes are live because all of this season dropped at once. So for me to answer that right now, no. What I will say on the back end for podcasts that I have done in the past that have had more downloads, a lot of it came from the more content I put out for it. And that was cutting more videos, doing more in regards to an SEO friendly blog post. So there would be more chance of organic visibility out there.
Right.
That's where I've seen the benefit. But to speak to your point, yes, there have been times where I've had people on my podcast. Probably the best example I can give was my very first podcast back in the day. It was called Over a Couple of Beers. It was a beer-based podcast that I did with my best friend. And then eventually I ended up just doing it on my own before I wound the series down and shifted course to another podcast. But I had the opportunity to interview Claudio Sanchez of Coheed and Cambria. And that was probably the biggest name from a global scale that I had on the show.
Sure.
And when people heard that was oh my God, really? You got to sit down with Claudio? So they came running for that. And on a local level, I had a gentleman who's very well known here named Rick Seaback. And he's the voice of so many kids' lives because he was the narrator on all of these like PBS type specials. WQED is the station here in Pittsburgh. and he was the narrator for all of this Pittsburgh history. And he's got an amazing voice, and he was at a beer event that I was doing a podcast at, and he came and sat down with me, which was awesome for me because I've known him. I've got to tip a few glasses of beer with him in the past. It was nice to sit down with him in that respect. But when people heard that name, wow, cool, I'm going to listen to that. So yeah, there is that opportunity to open some doors when you get somebody that could be considered a celebrity or a VIP. But to me, the way I look at those types of opportunities is it's great. And if they do come your way, absolutely take advantage of them. But don't change your demeanor, because every single person that you have across the table from you or on the other side of the screen, they're giving their time just as much as that celebrity or VIP is. And they've got just as much value to bring. It's just a different story. And the masses may not be familiar with it yet, but your show is going to help them get familiar with it. So don't change your disposition. Take the opportunities as they come, but ultimately strive to create value with every single person you talk to. And that's going to make for a show that people want to tune into every single time you release new content.
Well, I couldn't agree more with that statement for sure. When I noticed, when I get somebody that people do know on my show, I've noticed a few trends. Like, most people don't necessarily care any more or less for that episode. So the current following of my show doesn't necessarily care one way or another. And the person who comes on the show, they don't typically promote it like some of the other people do. So the show doesn't typically get the legs that some of the other episodes do, because some of the other episodes where the guest will promote it and the people who are listening to the show on a regular basis get behind it. So I think the shows do better. I can give you a few examples of that too. The very first episode of my show was a band named Von Ray. Von Ray was big in the 90s. They were, a great band. They were on tour with Creed and a handful of others. But they were a great band, one of my favorites, just the best guys in the world. But most people don't know who they are. But when they came on the show, they promoted the hell out of it. And It's a live show. They had hundreds of people watching live. And I thought that was the greatest thing, especially for the very first episode of the show. And then the second episode and third episode may have had like 30 people watching live. It was a huge slap in the face. It's like, reality check, buddy. But no, I mean, it was great. I understand that because they took the time to promote it. And then I noticed another one recently. My 9-year-old daughter, she auditioned for the Cincinnati Ballet, and she was in their largest performance of the year when they did the Nutcracker. And that episode, well, she says, "Daddy, now that I'm a professional, can I come on the show?" So
That's awesome.
I said, "Sure." My wife's telling me, just bring her on for like 5 minutes and that'll be enough. She'll be happy. I said, no. I brought her on and I treated her like any other guest, and I interviewed her like any other guest. And she's 9, and she held up as well, if not better, than most other guests, which was fantastic. It was funny to me to see. She just seems so grown up. And she even turned the tables on me for a couple questions, which I thought was funny. But that episode got a huge amount of downloads strictly because it was different. It was a little girl and people thought it was cute and all that stuff. So there's really no rhyme or reason when a show does good. It's just a matter of what people resonate with. So I don't necessarily think it's the celebrities, because a lot of times, like, I had the guitar tech from the Steve Miller Band on the show, and that was a very, very good episode. I mean, nobody knows who the guitar tech for Steve Miller is. They know Steve Miller.
Right.
But this guy came on, and his stories were good, and the information he provided was great, and it was just a good episode. So you just don't know.
Yeah, and that's something about running the show and calling the shots, is you can try things and find out what works, discover what works. And since you have a lot of creative license, you can determine whether the person you're bringing on the show to help you spin audio gold, as I like to say, is good enough for your show. I mean, if you feel like you have to rearrange your standards or lower your standards, that might not be the best fit. Doesn't mean they're not a good fit for another podcast, but you know what you want for your audience. And that's something that, as you develop your brand and develop your podcast and you have these conversations with your audience, or you can even gauge it based on the number of downloads, and you can see trends in those numbers. I don't particularly subscribe to buying into download metrics 100% like so many do. I've got several rants out there that will back that up. But there's still a lot of value in knowing what your audience wants, because that allows you to create from a more open-minded perspective, but say, okay, this is something that didn't really get a lot of response, or people literally reached out to me and said, don't do that anymore. Don't talk about that anymore. It doesn't interest me.
I tell
You can
my
then
wife
make
to
changes.
stop listening, but she
like
still tells me that.
And there are some reviews that I've read on when I've looked at podcasts, some in passing, some for my own research, some for clients' research, whatever the case may be, where people literally put in the review, this show was great until they started talking about X. I'm out. This is not for me anymore. And I get, like, evolution's going to happen.
Right.
In order to grow, you're going to piss some people off along the way. Again, you have to look at the big picture. If you are bringing in more people than you are shoving away, you're doing something right. Don't think that you're doing something wrong because one person got pissed off. But yeah, overall, there's a lot of value in understanding what you're bringing to your audience, because they are the ones that are going to show up for you if you give them what they want.
You know, that's another good point. It reminds me, like we talked about the transition, the evolution of my show, going from talking to people in the industry and about how they got there, and it was very, development focused. It was, how did you get here? What kind of tips and tricks can we get from you? And let's hear some of your stories. And that turned into the author, speaker, coach thing, which turned into bringing in CEOs of companies, and it kind of made a transition over time. And that show had like 300 and something episodes of that, but the first 50 were like entertainment based, and then it turned into, strictly leadership style stuff. Mm-hmm. And my wife thought I was crazy to want to go back to the entertainment style show, because she says, you've built up an audience and they're not going to follow you. And I was like, what? You don't think they're going to care? And she's like, no. She's like, make it a completely different show, because if I was following you for leadership and you start talking about entertainment stuff, I'm not going to want to listen to it anymore.
Right.
And I know she's right, but I don't like it. So I did. I put it under a different name, and all of that stuff, and that's why this show started the way it did. Mm-hmm. But I agree with you that you could lose an audience if you pivot too far out of whack.
Yeah. Now, I've had that debate with myself. That's why, like with podcast theory, I'm doing something that I wouldn't typically recommend to other people, and it was only because when I looked at the big picture of what that show is going to be about. When I started it, I called it Pod Theory. And I guess at that point, I wasn't thinking SEO wise, because I'm like, why didn't I just call it Podcast Theory from the start? Whatever. Yeah. But then when I did the rebranding, when I leaned into the solo stuff, and it was such a fleeting moment that I did that. I should have just done it as a theme for the season and not named the show that for a season. And that's when I realized the error of my way. I looked at it and I contemplated over and over deleting those episodes.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I think that's a very good point. You're bringing up a couple things.
Okay.
One, the name. Let's start there. Pod Theory versus Podcast Theory. I know why you did Pod Theory, because it sounds trendy. It sounds like
it flows.
It's catchy. It's clever.
Yeah.
But like you're mentioning, it's not SEO friendly, because people aren't searching for pod. They're searching for podcast.
Well, but pod could come up with a number of different things. Freaking K-cups and
right. Yeah.
Like living in a pod or flying away in a pod, a pea pod. Like, again, there was just so much confusion from an SEO standpoint that, again, I wish I would have caught myself sooner, but it is what it is. I'm learning and growing.
We all are, right? I mean, that's why we say learn from us, only not because we know everything, but because we've made all the mistakes.
Yeah, and that's why I don't ever mind throwing my fuck ups out there. I'll talk about them because I'm happy they happened. It helps me learn and grow. That's how we all need to look at that stuff.
Fail fast, learn quick. That's all. That's what it's about. But
Yeah.
no, so your show, and then you bring up the next point of, do you keep it in the same feed, and do you keep going down the same path? And those are the type of things I wonder about, because there's another show that we're both familiar with that we both listen to and so forth, but I won't throw names. But it started very business-like, and it turned into more of an entertainment style show. And again, it's very similar path, but I chose to go two different feeds because of that, where that person did not go two different feeds. And it was very odd for me as a consumer of the content to go through, and then all of a sudden, what just happened?
Right.
This is not the same to me. Where yours, I think would be good to be in the same feed because you're still discussing the same topic in general.
Yeah,
You might
exactly.
be taking a new approach on it, but you're talking about the same topic.
Yep.
So I think that's very important, not just for us to dwell on, because we do dwell on it. Let's face it, we agonize over things that people aren't necessarily going to care about.
Right.
But I do think it's important for anybody else who's going through that same thing that they need to know that. So
I think when people do listen to podcast theory as it is, and I'll break the news now, Jay's going to be joining me for season 4 as the featured co-host, and we're going to dive into something podcasting related. We haven't decided exactly what to lean into just yet, but that whole series is dedicated to helping podcasters, whether they're brand new or whether they're seasoned, gain more knowledge and insight and maybe change a few perspectives and ultimately just make them a more well-rounded podcaster. That was the theme from the start. And that's why the final decision came where I looked at everything and said, there's no point in taking any of this away, because no matter what aspect of podcasting you want to lean into, if this is the resource you find, it's going to help you. And I connected with a gentleman who found the show and told me how inspirational a lot of this has been for him looking to start a podcast. And he's binged many episodes, and it's bingeable content. They're short. What's out there now is pretty short. They're all 5, 10, 15-minute episodes. A few are longer, ones that I've had interviews on, but for the most part, I knew that when someone found this, they would be able to lean into it and learn and gain some perspectives on podcasting. And again, is it for everybody? Probably not. There's probably some people that think I'm full of it, and that's okay. I'm happy about that.
Well, you know
again, if you're not pissing people off, you're not doing it right. But overall, I think there's a lot of value in leaving it all out there, and it's just growing the content from there, I think, is going to be very powerful, and there's going to be a lot of good stuff coming down the pike for folks to listen to. Creating engaging, explosive content that positions your brand as an authority and go-to resource in your industry doesn't need to be complicated, stressful, or time-consuming. All you need is a strategy that sets you up for success and a partner to keep you on the right track. This is my mission at Bombtrack Media. I'll show you the most efficient way to produce brand-elevating content that can be utilized throughout your digital footprint, all done with your goals and busy schedule in mind. You're not a full-time podcaster. Why commit to a full-time podcaster's schedule? It's time for you to blow this up and rethink how you grow your brand. Visit bombtrackmedia.com today to learn more.
I agree with your statement in the fact that, it's good to piss people off because you're making people think when you piss people off.
Mm-hmm.
It's good or bad. People are going to love you or hate you. There's usually no middle ground.
Right.
And it's taken me, especially somebody who works in development and branding, it's taken me a long time to really grasp that. And I think this show that I'm doing now, I'm 51 episodes into it. And 52 is tonight at 10 p.m. if anybody would like to join live. I understand this is pre-recorded.
Yeah, you missed it, everybody.
But sorry. Anyways, nonetheless.
But every Monday night at 10 o'clock, though, right?
Every Monday night. There you
go. There's
like
the plug.
There you go. But beautiful. No, I mean, I get that. It's taken me that long to realize just be yourself, because if, don't try to be anybody else. Don't try to, do something you're not aware of. We talk, 12 episodes deep of podcasting, there's a lot of things we agree on and there's a lot of things we don't agree on, but it doesn't make one of them more valid than the other, because a lot of things are just opinion-based. And I mean, we can go down the list of opinion-based stuff, but there's things you just need to know. What is the best practice? What is the typical standard way of doing something? And then if you choose not to do it that way, you're doing it by choice. You're not doing it by mistake. And I think that's really what we need to focus on, is that when we do something, at least know why people choose to do it in this way, why it's become the standard. And if you don't want to follow that standard, that's your choice.
It's sad that we've become a society that is so afraid of having those types of conversations, to where you may not agree with what somebody has to say. So what? Learn from that person. Why do they think that? But we're so entrenched in our own beliefs that we can't see the forest for the trees. And it sucks, because you talk about the divisiveness that we have in our world. we never had these platforms like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all the places where you can voice your thoughts and basically have your own pulpit to stream from.
Right.
We didn't have that in the past, so therefore we didn't have that type of divisiveness. We had it, but it wasn't on this scale. Now it's to the point where it's so hard to even have a conversation and put your thoughts out there because the person that doesn't buy into it is just going to fire back why they don't buy into it. But overall, just that messaging that's out there, the fact that we aren't thinking about what other people believe in, buy into, how their perspectives could impact our worlds. If we can't get back to that in some capacity, that's our downfall. And we're going to miss so much. And when you apply that to a branding standpoint and growing your brand, there are people out there that won't necessarily build their brand the same way as you, but it doesn't make it any less of the right way to do it. You find your path, you find your way, you learn from what others have done, you listen to people's mistakes, and then you capitalize on that and say, okay, I can do it this way and it's going to work for me. To me, that's a very individualistic way of looking at it, but at the same time, you're letting perspectives from the outside help you out. And that, again, as I've said a few times, this conversation helps you grow. It helps you learn.
Absolutely. And you are 100% right. I mean, the fact that there's more than one way to do one thing doesn't mean that my way is better than your way or your way is better than mine. And that's the thing that we need to establish, because just these couple things we're talking about with your show, is in you're making decisions. Do you keep it in the same feed or do you go to a different feed? I made that same decision. We both chose to do two different things. Doesn't mean that your way was right, my way was wrong. I think my way was right for my situation. Right. Your way is right for your situation. And same thing with the name of the show. You changed the name from Pod Theory to Podcast Theory. Okay, I changed it from Franze and Friends to the Jay Franze Show. And there was reasons behind both of those. For one, there was a little bit of an overlap, so I could transition out the guests that were scheduled ahead of time. But for two, because I wanted to pivot and I didn't want to confuse an audience base. So it took a little longer to redevelop an audience, but I think those are the same type of things. And like this show, Let's Blow This Up, it says, let's blow this up with Jason Cercone, where mine is my name.
Yeah.
And I will be the first to tell you the way you chose to do it is technically the standard, the way it should be. And I agree with you 100%. It is the standard. You chose the right way, and I chose not to do it the right way. But that's why I have a tagline, because I need to let people know what my show is about. And again, it just shows that we are, even though we both understand why these things happen, we're still choosing different ways of doing something.
And we both share this in common, and I want to see more podcasts produce this, and I know you feel the same way, or produce this way. Don't have the word podcast in your title or as part of your show. Like, I'm not Let's Blow This Up podcast.
Right.
You're not the Jay Franze Show podcast, which is just from the redundancy of Department of Redundancy Department. Yeah, fuck that line up. But yeah, no, I just feel like 2024, we know what a podcast is. And I understand that, okay, yeah, there's going to be people that are very new to this and get introduced to it. But at the same time, you just don't need to have that in there. It isn't like Friends was called Friends TV show, Seinfeld TV show.
Right.
Like, there are ways that you can differentiate what your podcast is without having that in the title. I just feel like that's a new way of looking at it. But that's my opinion, but I'm going to scream that one because I think it looks cleaner.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
A lot cleaner.
And plus the word podcast, technically it's a made-up word. So, I mean...
Technically.
And we get that. But, I mean, it may change over time. It may turn into something else. And now does your show have to change its title because of that? So, I mean, and plus, I think it's starting to mean less when people search for it in podcast apps and things like that, where that doesn't hurt you as much as it used to. But there was a time when having the word podcast in there would just clutter up the search, where now I don't think that happens. I think the search is becoming smarter.
Yeah, and the fact that if you're searching for a podcast within a podcast app,
right,
you're going to find a podcast and know it's a podcast. If not, we have to have a whole separate conversation. Jay, as expected, this has been great, but I want to bring us home with something. Again, I mean, we covered a ton on branding, and obviously both of us being in the podcasting game, I think a lot of that applies to the branding conversation of today. But I got to ask, What is the best way to eat a steak, and why is the answer medium rare?
Okay, well, the answer is not medium rare, so let's start there.
Let's argue, my friend.
All right, I know you are from the area of cheesesteak, and
No, I'm not. That's on the other side of the state.
No, it's the other side of the state. You're in the state.
All right, fine.
All right, and me being from Boston, we have the roast beef is typically the way to go. But you're talking about steak specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Steak specifically, medium well to well done, hands down.
God, what the hell is wrong with you?
Oh, hands down. And I love steak. It's.
Yeah, I know.
If
That's
you
why
asked
I
me
brought
what
this
my
up.
favorite food was, it would be steak. Steak and ravioli is my two favorite foods.
Well, steak and chicken wings. Raviolis are interesting.
I love chicken wings too. Don't get me started. I mean, I'm a huge fan of chicken wings. Boneless, but I like chicken wings.
Those aren't chicken wings. Those are chicken nuggets.
I understand that. They're chicken nuggets, but I've got kids. I like chicken nuggets.
So do I, but I don't call them chicken wings.
I know, but I like boneless wings only because of the fact that I don't have to fight with the bone and the cartilage and all the other stuff that comes along.
What kind of battles are you having? It's not that hard.
I have battles. But let's get back to your steak question. All right, let's forget my chicken wing obsessions. But steak, medium well for sure. It has to be these days sirloin steak, no fat, medium well, blackened, and oh dear God, it's the best thing ever. Best thing ever.
Medium.
And I used to be big on fillets, and I still love fillets because they're very low on fat. But lately, sirloin.
Isn't it? I mean, you were talking about having battles with the bones of a chicken wing. You want to chew on boot leather?
Oh, dude.
That's basically what you're
problem with
creating for yourself.
Your rare steak is I can't get, I don't know how graphic you want to get, but I can't get my tooth through a rare steak. It's chewy. I don't want my steak to be chewy.
If it's cooked right, it melts. Medium rare to medium. You go any higher than that, you're fucking up your steak.
No. And we laugh. Again, I mentioned being from Boston and having the roast beef sandwiches. That is a big thing in Boston. You can find, it's just like you find a roast beef shop on every corner. Roast beef on one corner, Dunkin' Donuts on one corner, church on one corner, and then a liquor store on the other corner. I mean, that's our world up there. I mean, we have, whacked out beliefs up there. That's fine. But there's this one place called Giovanni's. Shout out to Giovanni's, my favorite place in the whole world when it comes to roast beef sandwiches. It's in my hometown. But they are with you. They make it almost rare to the point where the bread looks like it's absorbing blood. I mean, it's that.
I like it already. Love it.
Man, it's the best roast beef sandwich ever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so thinly sliced. I mean, it is. Oh, it's awesome.
And it's rare. See? See?
I don't have anything against it. The thinly sliced stuff is easy to eat. The thick steak that's rare, no, not so much.
But if it's a good quality piece of meat, you're able to eat that, and again, it melts. I mean, if you're talking about something that is a little bit tougher, like a chuck, and that's cooked rare, yeah, that's going to be a little bit chewier and even on the rare side. Yeah. But if you get like a perfect strip or a T-bone and it's medium rare, those pieces just
what is it with your bones?
What? I'm not eating the bone. You cut around it. There's so much flavor.
Food. You're wasting food at that point.
How am I wasting food? I'm getting all that meat off that bone.
Stuck to the bone. I mean, then you're wrestling with the bone. You're back to my chicken wing dilemma.
You're making me reevaluate whether we should even do this season of podcast.
I told you right from the beginning we shouldn't.
That is true. You did try to talk me off that ledge, didn't you?
I'm going to start bringing roast beef sandwiches with me.
Well, we still have that Yankees Red Sox bullshit to deal with. So.
Boston Red Sox, absolutely hands down.
Yeah, I know. We don't have time.
Boston
to get into
Red
that
Sox
today.
with a roast beef sandwich, medium well steak.
God, so many things wrong.
If I was still in Boston, dude, when we do this upcoming show series, I would have roast beef sandwiches in front of me every time.
Well, I have nothing against the roast beef sandwiches. I have a big problem with your baseball team and the way you prefer to eat your steak, sir. Well,
you know what? I'm in the South now, so you know what I can do? I can come with all the steak I ever want. So I'll come here with steak.
I love it.
Hey, one more thing.
No, fire. Yeah, let's end on a strong note. We know we're never going to agree on the steak thing, apparently.
No, but I will tell you, as much of a chain restaurant as this is, that Texas Roadhouse has become my go-to place for steak.
Really?
Man, they are good. And I've never,
Wow.
I've had Texas Roadhouse everywhere, but the one here in town, I don't know if it's different in any way. I doubt it. It's a chain,
Yeah.
but man, it's good. It's very
I've been, I mean, this isn't a knock on the restaurant. I've just never really been in a habit of going to this place. But I remember one time, geez, I'm dating myself here. I got to think of the date. This was probably 2008, 9. I worked in the car industry at the time. And the guys I worked with, that's where they wanted to go after work. Okay. I was the new guy. I'm not going to argue. Let's go.
right.
And I don't know if it's still like this today. I don't even know if it was like this at any of the other locations. Are there peanut shells all over the floor?
No, it hasn't been like that. I mean, you can, I guess, but
That
no.
was what I walked in, and it was just like people were just chucking peanuts
Right,
on
yeah.
the floor. I'm like, what the hell is happening?
Yeah.
I don't remember my experience with. I know I had a steak. I don't remember the experience. It was so long ago, and I've had so many steaks since then. All medium rare, thank you very much. But I don't think that was just weird. And again, I don't know if they still do it. I know I still see the Texas Roadhouses around. And like I said, this is no knock on that place whatsoever. I really have no
You could say anything you
information
want
to
about it.
have a frame of reference.
They could have rats running around the kitchen. I would still go there every day to eat. That place is
That's
awesome.
It says a lot about your medium well to well done
I'm
steak
telling you,
choice.
Hey, side of rat, it's pretty good. But, dude, I'll tell you, I've traveled all around this country going to steakhouses with clients because that's where everybody always wants to go to a steakhouse because they're not paying
Sure.
for it.
Yeah.
So I've eaten at all the great steakhouses. Texas Roadhouse, better than all of them.
Now, all right, and this is how we're really going to wrap this up because this could go on all night. But I have to ask: don't these steakhouses try to talk you out of it? I thought the steakhouses were more in the mindset of the best way to cook a steak is medium
Yeah,
rare to medium.
They don't agree with me. I'm not saying they agree.
Okay, well, no one
Just
else
like
does
you don't
either.
agree with me, but
Not at all. No. But despite all of that, this has been a lot of fun, man. I'm glad you took the time to join me.
my pleasure.
We're going to do this again. And again, like I said before, our Podcast Theory Season 4, that's the next production of Bombtrack Media, and Jay will be my featured co-host. We'll come up with something good to talk about, and I'm going to avoid steak at all costs because I can't have this conversation.
I won't.
Oh, you're going to bring it up? Fine.
Oh, I'm going to have a steak.
Stay
in front of me.
tuned, folks. Well, I will too. It's just mine's going to be the way it should be.
Again, we don't have to agree.
We don't, but this is something you should really think about. All right. Now,
Hey, you're coming from the land of cheese whiz on steak.
no,
No,
I'm not.
you
I am coming
you
from the
have no
land where
right.
there is coleslaw and French fries on your sandwich.
Oh,
That's
God,
the
no.
Pittsburgh sandwich. No,
Oh.
I don't necessarily agree. I don't hate it. It's a good sandwich.
Yeah,
It
I mean,
does
that
sound
stuff's
weird, though,
fine.
right?
Yeah, no.
That's
I
Pittsburgh
mean, I love
sandwich.
all the foods. Just don't put them together.
All right, man. When you come through Pittsburgh before we go to Podcast Movement, I'm taking you to Permanis. You're going to try this.
All right.
You have to
Just don't
experience
give me any
it.
cheese whiz. I
I'm
don't
gonna
want cheese whiz.
You're
on
going to
my
get a
steak.
steak, medium rare steak sandwich at Permanis. Oh, no, we'll figure it out.
No, I'll do it. I'll do
Damn
whatever
right
you
you will.
recommend.
You're
I'll
damn right you
try it,
will.
but you're going to be trying some of my stuff too.
I'm not eating well done steak. I've had that. I'll do your roast beef sandwich if you
Yes,
get your hands
we'll
on one
do
of
the roast
those.
beef.
I'm fine
We'll
with
do
that.
it.
All right, brother. Again, this is a lot of fun. I hope everybody else had as much fun as we did. And looking forward to doing this with you again in the near future, my friend.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
You got it.